So, Siddharth, just before you start the presentation, I'd like to
Yes,
introduce you and just can you stop sharing till you start the presentation?
sure, sure. Yes.
So, good morning and welcome everyone to the level 2 webinar of music production. We had done the level 1 before, but we are going to do a repeat of level 1 in the coming month, I believe. So, that will be like Siddharth again is going to be doing that. So, Siddharth Sharma has been associated with us for a while now. He is the academic consultant for music production, academic support for music production, and he has studied in the UK at the Adam Smith College, and he's a Pro Tools 201 certified, and he is more importantly actually not just a sound engineer, but he's a music producer, and he's going to elaborate a little bit about the difference between the two fields and what it really means. So he's a fantastic musician, he's a guitar player, and I have had a good fortune to play with his band as well. So we go back many years, and
Yes.
so here he is, and today he'll be presenting the level 2 of the music production webinar. Over to you, Siddharth.
Thanks, Ritesh, for that lovely intro. I'm pretty sure I don't deserve all of it, but thank you nonetheless. Hi, everyone. Good morning to you all. Firstly, thank you so much for taking the time out to join this webinar. And I'll today be going over level 2 of the music production coursework offered by Rock School. And I have a presentation for all of you, just to kind of explain what we do and what's the work process behind the course. And by the end of the presentation, I will be taking some questions. So if you have any queries regarding music production, you can, make a note of it during the presentation, and I would be happy to answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So, Ritesh, I think we're good to go. What do you say?
Yeah, definitely. Everybody is going to be on mute. I'm going to be typing in some housekeeping announcements in the chat.
That's absolutely
But
fine.
the main thing is that everybody is on mute, but you have the facility of unmuting yourself. Please do so only when you have a question to ask or something. Why you am again muting you? Don't unless you have a question to ask. You're free to speak. Kindly collect your questions and keep them till the end of the question answer session round. So please keep writing down your questions so you don't forget. And we will have the question answer round at the end, so you may ask all your questions at that point.
Great.
Yes, Raj, you
So,
may start, please.
hi everyone. So, like I said, we'll be discussing music production today. So, welcome, firstly. And, today we are talking about specifically grade 4 and 5, okay, of the music production coursework, which encompasses level 2 for Rock School, okay. So, let's begin. And I think the first thing that I want to firstly, talk about is why do Rock School music production? Ritesh, one question. You can see the entire slide, correct? Fantastic. Okay,
Yes, we can see it.
great. So, the first question is why Rock School music production. So, I have a few pointers, uh, in order to elaborate on our workflow. Okay. So the first thing is that, you have to understand the course is designed in a way to enhance your skills, uh, and the most important thing being that since, we live in busy times, it's great that it's an examination body. So what tends to happen is you have the freedom to study in your own time, which gives everybody the flexibility to, pursue whatever grade they're pursuing at a time convenient for them, which means that if any student is lagging behind because, he or she didn't get the time to kind of, read the coursework and things like that, they can kind of cope up with it at their own pace and not feel left out, which is very typical in a, normal classroom scenario, right? And this is, backed up by, unrivaled academic grounding. What I really mean by that is that, the people who are actually writing these courses, they're one, you know professionals who are actually working in the industry worldwide, so they're extremely relevant, and they are up to date with the technologies and the, the processes involved, with the music production art, so to speak, you know so when you're talking about Rock School music production courses, they are like written by the best in the field, and they're extremely relevant. They're not like a typical book which was written 10 years ago. Everything keeps getting updated, and I think that's very important in the times we live in. Now, the other thing is that, which is a very nice, is the fact that, you're allowed to choose your specialization, be it in the type of genre that you want to pursue, because, for example, in different grades, we are talking about, we are introducing different genres and styles of music to students, right? Now, you might ask, how does that apply in our specialization, in the sense that some of you might have checked out the course books, right? So it is to do with the coursework task primarily, just to clarify, where you can, pick up a genre of your choice and kind of, specifically work on that. So that's just something to keep in mind. So I think these are some very valid points as to why somebody might want to get into rock school music production courses, because, like I said, extremely relevant. Take your own time to study, and of course, backed up by some amazing professionals who have written the coursework for you guys. Now, now this question pops up a lot, and I'm pretty sure it pops up, might have popped up for you guys as well as for some students. What is the biggest difference between music production and sound engineering? Because, these two are actually different fields, but they overlap so much that people, one think that it's the same thing, you know, to get confused between them. So let me just quickly clarify what music production is and what sound engineering is, at least what I consider them to be, you know. So when we're talking about sound engineering is very specifically the art of recording good audio, or rather good sound. Doesn't necessarily have to be music. You have to keep that in mind as well, that it is, Ritesh, just one, I
Yeah.
have one request.
Mhm.
With certain people, there's some, people in the background in the webcam. So
Mhm.
that's kind of distracting. So if you could request them to, if there's somebody from their families attending to them, they can just like put their video on mute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you have a background, people in your background is
Yeah,
kindly
yeah, yeah,
off
yeah,
your video.
yes. Yeah, because it's right in front of me, so I'm getting distracted. Sorry about that. Yeah.
You can
So,
choose the view on the right side as a standard view or set
oh,
that
oh,
speaker view. Then you will only
oh,
see
that
the
works. Yes, thank you so much. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. Zoom 101. Okay, getting back to this. So I think I consider sound engineering strictly as the art of recording, and music production is more about creative music arrangement and facilitating a context to that recording. So what I mean by that is, a sound engineer doesn't, for example, have to be a music producer, and a music producer doesn't have to be a sound engineer. Okay. And the other thing is also that, as you go up in the rock school grades, you will see a lot of overlapping information, especially grade 5 onwards. In fact, even in grade 4, that it kind of merges the gap between music production and sound engineering. But purely as a definition, as a sound engineer, you are just strictly looking at recording a piece of music without necessarily any creative input. It's mostly technical input. Whereas when you're talking about music production, it's all creative input. You know, nowadays, I can guarantee you that 90% of music producers actually don't need to go into the studio to record their sounds and instruments. Instead, they can just use the software that, hey, okay, what does rock school offer as a music production course? I would say one which talks about arrangement, music creation, okay, that overlaps with sound engineering, which is the art of recording. Now, a person can be both. And the great thing is that as you go higher in the grades, you will notice that since there's that overlap, after a certain point, you will realize that that has its own advantages. I don't see any disadvantages to that. But again, it really depends on what the person wants. Now, since I've completed the slide, is anybody confused about what is the difference between the two? If yes, now's the time to ask me. or should I move on? Anybody? All good?
Um,
Yes.
Hey Siddharth, I'm sorry. So I'm not confused with what you just told about these two branches, but I just wanted to know like where should a student start with? Should he start with the music production or should he start with the sound engineering part?
See, I'll be honest, Nitin. Hi, firstly.
Hi.
Yeah, it's very simple. At the end of it, like I said, they're overlapping fields, right?
Right.
So, for example, I'll give you my example. I started up with audio engineering. Okay. Now,
Okay.
if you think about the difference between them, okay, if you were a sound engineer first, your natural instinct would be to what? Record material, right? As a music producer, your natural instinct is to get creative and basically arrange with whatever's available to you, be it sample packs which are pre-recorded, you know. So what I feel is that if you are more inclined towards music, right? If you're a musician, for example, and you want to kind of, step into production or engineering, I think music production is a much more natural step, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's much more natural. So, but then again, it really depends on your personality. Some people like the idea of, for example, if you were doing electronic music production, it's short. But let's say if you were a guitarist or a drummer, right? Then perhaps sound engineering is a better route. Like I can see a drum set behind you. So if you wanted to record that drum kit properly, probably looking into sound engineering is fantastic. But that's what I'm trying to say, that with the rock school courses, it's so interesting that after grade 4 onwards, everything's like a mixed bag. So it's not that you will feel vacant in on the sound engineering side of things, or feel completely vacant, knowledge wise, on music production side of things. So it really depends on your end goal, you know that's what I feel, because they overlap
I
so
think that
much.
makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So, I hope that answers your
Yeah.
question. Should I move
Thank you,
on?
Siddharth. Yeah,
No
you
problem.
shall
No
move on.
problem. Okay. So, and this is like I have a few, nice photos just to kind of explain to you visually what the difference might be. On the left, you see a guy in front of these, a mixing board and a Pro Tools rig with, analog gear, and his aim is to record material, not to necessarily add creative input, although there is creativity in recording as well, choice of microphones and things like that. you know but music production, you know on the right you can see a very simple setup. It just shows a keyboard and a couple of monitors and a sound card, right? So point is that in order to run a music production rig successfully, all you need is a laptop and a software. But for good audio engineering results, you need to work in a studio or build a studio, things like that. So I guess another differentiation is that I think music production is easier for, you know, musicians and casual, you know, uh, consumers of music to dive into, rather than audio engineering, because a lot of people have this misconception as well that, there's a lot of science also involved. Of course, on the audio engineering side of things, when it comes to acoustics and, things like that, of course, there is a bit of mathematics and physics. But on the music production end of things, not really. It's more about the hearing game, so anyways, we move on. Let's just quickly talk about what, grade 4 and grade 5, which encompasses level 2 of rock school, kind of is gonna offer everyone. Okay. So now, before we begin, I want to kind of just, segregate what entails a rock school exam, okay, especially music production. Excuse me. So, out of the 100% marks, 60% actually goes to the coursework task, which I will be elaborating what it is, but it is an amalgamation, a practical, basically based on what you've learned in theory and what you've learned during your listening tests. Okay, so 60% of the entire thing goes to the coursework task. Okay, that is followed by 25% of, you know theory in a way. Okay, um and 15% is devoted to listening tests, because it is a combination of all these three. You learn theory, you listen to things, and then you implement that in the coursework, and I think it makes total sense. Like, unlike typical examinations where I think theory is everything, I think rock school's awesome in that regard, because it is about your end result, not just about what you can mug up or what you can kind of, just, as we call it, rattofy, in Hindi, right? So, so the idea is that when you're looking at your exam progress, it is down to your practical knowledge, what you've, absorbed practically, not just theoretically. Okay. So let's move on. So let's quickly, I'm going to go over the highlights of grade 4. Okay. What all subjects or topics are being covered in grade 4 of the music production course? Okay. So the first thing is we're going to talk about in grade 4 is studio equipment and functions. When I talk about studio equipment, what I really mean specifically to grade 4 is things like compressors, EQs, noise gates. We're also talking about, basic mixer features and things like that, you know then we're talking about audio formats. Now, audio formats are taken for granted these days, but back in the day, when music recording started, everything used to be recorded in mono, meaning center image only, no left, no right. So if you listen to old music, such as even I think early Beatles, Elvis, first few albums, they're all recorded in mono, so there's no stereo image. Okay. And you might wonder, okay, why do we need stereo? Because hello, we have 2 ears, so it's to give us a sense of a sonic field in front of us when we're listening to music. you know so of course, in this course, we start with the origins of audio recording, which is of course mono. We talk about stereo, which is the most common way of consuming music these days. We have a left and we have a right, you know and and if you're wondering how we get that sense of width in stereo, just to kind of elaborate on this a little bit, basically your ears are placed at a distance from the left and the right, right? So why do we hear things in the center when we listen to music, right? So but the first thing is, when music is recorded, we have to make sure that there's a center image. Okay, firstly. Secondly, the reason you're hearing a width in stereo is because music is hitting you at different time intervals on ear on your left ear and your right ear, and that time difference between the sound reaching our ears is creating that sense of width in front of us when we listen to music. So of course stereo is the most common way of consuming music. And then we also dive into surround sound. Now, surround sound can be 5.1, okay, and 7.1. Now, does anybody know what 5.1 means? Question.
Is
One
it the
sub.
number of speakers?
Well, yes. I mean, but what is the 5:1? And does anybody have any idea about the placement of how it is
Five
done?
speakers and one sub.
Subwoofer.
Fantastic. So
Subwoofer. Yeah.
exactly. But do you guys know the orientation of those 5 speakers? Do you know?
Uh, right and left and middle, like that. So I'm
Right
not
and
sure.
left in
Well,
front, right and left in back, rear,
Yeah,
and one in center.
I'm not sure.
Exactly. No, no, yeah, Shubham was correct that, and the reason is basically, think of it this way: when you go to see a movie in the cinemas, or if you, let's say, have a home theater system, okay, so you have one speaker in the center, correct, rightly said by Shubham, one left and one right. Then we have something we call the rear left and the rear right. Okay, that makes up a total of 5 speakers plus the subwoofer, which is giving out the bass frequencies. So therefore, it is called a 5.1 system. Okay, a 7.1 system adds 2 more speakers, the middle left and the middle right. You know, so what they are trying to achieve is really, surround the audience, and it is not just about cool effects of, panning things from left to right. you know, it is all about giving a sonic experience that supports, let's say, the visual on screen. And it's one of the most popular things in like Dolby encoding, and 5.1 surround sound encoding is very popular in music. So point being, the reason I'm explaining this is that if some of you, or let's say some students, from the teachers who are present here might want to pursue post production as a career in music, we do kind of touch upon it, so the person is not completely alien to the idea of post production. Just keep that in mind. Okay. So let's move on. In grade 4, we are also talking about.
Siddharth,
Yes.
sorry to disrupt. Can you please stay close to the mic so your audio doesn't drop? It's just
Uh,
volume is coming up and
sure. One second. I'll just.
up and down.
Yeah.
But increase the gain a little,
Or you want me
perhaps.
to increase again? 1 second. Yeah. Can you hear me better now? Awesome. Okay. So we are talking about file management. When I talk about file management, it is not only about just how to make a folder on your computer for music production. It is really that, for example, if you're working with various musicians and various producers, I don't know if some of you have sent like DAW sessions to different people, but what tends to happen is audio files go missing, MIDI files go missing. Those are very common fact, things that tend to happen to almost everybody in the beginning, right? So the Rock School Grade 4 addresses that, how to really manage your hard drive for optimal music production. So that's something that is covered in the theory. Now, apart from that, we are also looking at modules and third-party softwares that work in conjunction with your DAW to give you various effects. Could be EQs, could be compressors, could be reverbs and delays, right? Like basically, if you want to add an echo to your voice, it doesn't mean that you'll actually take a microphone to the mountains and sing there, right? I mean, maybe you would have to do that 20 years ago. Actually, not even 20 years ago. We used to have machines then, but you can't do that. It's not practical, right? So plugins really help you, achieve things that were not possible before, in the sense that if you want your voice to sound or your guitar to sound like you performing in Abbey Road studios, it's actually possible because now you have algorithms to emulate that space. So music production is so powerful now that you can emote your music with any feeling with the help of plugins. That's what I'm trying to get at. you know and when we talk about formats are just different, basically extensions of these plugins: AAX, VST3, VST2. Now these are very complex things, like they're basically different algorithms, depending on the performance, how it interacts with the computer. It doesn't mean that, for example, if you have AAX plugins versus VST three plugins, that, oh, one will sound better than the other. It is just the way it is interacting with the computer. But it is important to know because, for example, in Pro Tools, AAX styled plugins format works better than VST, right? But for something like Ableton and Logic, VST3 and VST2 are probably a better choice, you know but you need to be consciously aware of that. So we're covering that as well. Now, the second one being, now the other thing I want to talk about is, which is I think very important and kind of is usually overlooked, especially by music producers who are, or people who are pursuing music production, but who are working from home, or they have home studio setups. Now, you might notice that the mic I'm using is like right now a single mic, but if you notice, I have these two extensions here, right? Now, do you see that? Right? Now, that is actually to put on another mic. And the reason I'm showing off my beautiful mic is not to tell you that I have a mic, but is that the most interesting thing about grade 4, which I personally find, and is I think the most useful, is stereo miking techniques. Oh my God, they will change your world. You know. Now, the thing is, what I really mean by that is, okay, let me give you an example. So, firstly, we covered three stereo techniques in grade 4. Okay. Uh, One being AB, and I'll tell you what all these are: XY and MS. And now you might be thinking, what is this? Is this some chromosome or some weird value? Okay, but what it is basically different configurations of placing two mics to get a stereo image. Now, for example, I'm talking into the mic. This is just one mic, so you can hear me dead center on your headphones or on your laptop, right? Now, stereo mic techniques, what they help you do most importantly is really capture the true essence of an instrument. Okay. Whereas a mono technique is more about just documenting an instrument, I feel, you know. So what's happening is we have 2 years, like I said before, right? So similar to how we perceive sonic width, right? What stereo miking allows us to do is capture a wide stereo image, okay, and give us a sense of width with just one piece of recording. Meaning, for example, if I was playing the guitar on just one mic, it would be dead center, okay? Whereas if I had two mics placed together, one, it is giving me a wider image, what you call a stereo image, right? Secondly, it is also giving me an idea of where it is being performed, right? So let me just quickly go over with these three miking techniques. Okay, so when we are talking about AB, what we're talking about is what we call a spaced pair, which means there are two mics running parallelly together on something like a stereo bar, such as this. Okay, and they are basically parallel to each other, pointing towards the source. Now what that will end up doing is give you a very wide stereo image. Okay, now this kind of technique is not only great for recording acoustic guitars and things like that, but it is actually one of the most popular techniques for orchestration. Okay, orchestration, and when you're recording classical music, for example, also on acoustic pianos. I mean, Ritesh is a pianist. He would definitely have used this technique or have experienced this technique on stage, with a grand piano, once it's amplified. So, and of course for choirs as well, it's very popular for choirs. Now in India, usually we are used to, when we consume popular music, we don't really hear a lot of recorded music. When I say recorded, of course the vocals are recorded. I'm talking about mainstream music, but but if you listen to older Hindi music, if you're into Hindi music, or if you listen to any of the greatest hits from the West, you know, there is 99% there's a chance that one of these three techniques has been used. Okay, so AD is a spaced pair. XY is basically two mics on top of each other. Okay, so what that does is when two mics are placed like that, it's giving you a slightly more focused center image, which is great for slightly, for example, much denser mixes or things like that. And mid side is one of the most interesting ones where we are using different polar patterns on different microphones in this particular technique, namely a figure eight and a cardioid, to get a center image and a left and a right. So you end up getting three signals in your DAW. You know, now I had intended to give you examples of these, but the issue is on Zoom, it doesn't translate well. So what I will be doing is I'll probably share a folder, or you can get in touch with me on my email. I have certain audio examples, and if any one of you are interested in hearing the differences, I'll be happy to share some audio examples with you guys, so you can actually listen to it in your own time, because it does take a while to really understand the differences on a nice pair of headphones or speakers, so you can kind of see what works. And I'll be happy to share some more info on these techniques as well. Okay, now the other any questions about stereo miking techniques, by the way, before I proceed?
I have already asked them to save the questions till the end. So
Oh yeah, so
carry
I'm
on.
so sorry. Yeah, okay. So the next thing that we are talking about in grade 4 is, I think, one of the most important things when you are a music producer: synthesizers, samplers, and virtual instruments. Okay, now let me briefly tell you what these are. Synthesizers are using basic waveforms to create different sounds. Okay, now most pop, like these is whatever you hear on pop radio and things like that, a lot of those sounds come from synthesizers. Okay, and there are different types of synthesizers: subtractive synthesizers, wavetable, FM. This goes on and on. Okay, now, we won't get dive into those, but it is very important as a music producer for you people to understand what synthesizers do. I mean, all the iconic sounds in pop records, come from synths, and they're created from that. uh, you know let's talk, and let me give you an example of let me give you some song examples once I'm done explaining to you. Okay, second thing is samplers. What are samplers? Samplers basically take an existing sound, could be one small hit, a drum hit, or could be a loop. Okay, and they allow you to modify it. Okay, and recreate sequences. Okay, meaning, for example, if I don't have a drum kit in my home studio, doesn't mean that I need a drum kit to get drums into my recordings. You could use a sampler, okay, to recreate, different drum sounds recorded by other people and other actually companies who sell these kind of samplers, right? To get the desired results. And I think samplers are actually the most popular in hip hop and R&B. So every major hip hop beat or rap beat that you hear has been created on a sampler, be it a hardware sampler or within a DAW. So synths and samplers absolutely crucial to the building blocks of producing music. Now, third one, the controversial one, okay, is virtual instruments. Okay, now what are virtual instruments? As the name suggests, they're instruments that recreate a sound virtually. Okay, which means that if I need a cello or a violin in a piece of music that I'm creating, I don't have to go out and actually learn it. I could just play it on the keyboard, get the same sound, okay, and put it into my recordings or into my production rather. Okay, which means that nowadays the sound of virtual instruments, okay, are so close. And let me tell you how they are created. So for example, let's talk about an orchestration virtual instrument, an instrument that recreates sound of an orchestra. Okay, so how they do it is they actually go into a very high end studio, they actually record an orchestra. Okay, they will go through things like, and I'm being very honest at how meticulous it is. For example, on a keyboard you have, let's say, 5 octaves. Okay, they go all the way to 7 octaves, I believe. Okay, for every note on the keyboard they will record an orchestra with a one shot sample. Okay, for example, if I play, so the idea being that when I hits, for example, the note C on a keyboard, it should equate to a C being played on a cello, a violin, okay, let's say a tuba, okay, and all the instruments of the orchestra. And not just that, but at 127 different velocities, because that is the range of MIDI. Okay. So it might, these days we take virtual instruments for granted in a way because they're just available to us, right? But it is actually a very complex, for the good ones it is a very complex process to create them. But what does that mean for us? Means, one, we don't have to spend money on expensive studios to actually record music, that we might need. Bad thing is they're getting so good that they're actually making certain musicians go jobless. Truth. you know because it is expensive. Let's think about it. If you have to produce music with, let's say, even 10 people as an orchestra, let's say even a quartet, forget 10 people, okay, 4 people, you'll spend a lot of money. And rightly you should. If you have the budgets, by all means, I support the fact that you should get musicians, right? But if you don't, and let's say if you're a bedroom producer, who's trying to just create music, then of course virtual instruments are a gift. The other thing is, in Hollywood, how they work is, and I think of this as, if you are getting into arrangement and scoring, you can use virtual instruments to create a score, let's say for a film, or let's say for a web series or anything like that. And then within the DAW, you can actually get the notation of what you have composed with different sections and take it to the studio and then get real people to actually re-record the entire thing. So whatever your workflow, your end goal might be, virtual instruments are important, and this is covered in grade 4. And I feel it's quite early for it, but they've covered it, which is awesome. And the last thing being basic acoustics. Now, acoustics doesn't mean acoustic guitar. Acoustics very simply means how a sound or a piece of music it reacts in a certain space. Best example, most cliched example is when you're singing. They use the word bathroom singer, right? So it's like when I'm singing in a room, I sound different. When I sing, let's say in a church, I sound different. When I go sing in a bathroom, I sound different, right? Because my voice is being reflected from different surfaces, right? And that is adding to my original voice and giving me a certain effect. you know Another example is when you go to the hills, and a lot of people have this habit of saying hello, and you get this slap back, hello, hello, hello. Everybody's done it, right, at some point during the vacation time, right? So that is basically acoustics, because what's happening is you're hearing what we call a time delay. of your big, how you hear sound is it reflects from different surfaces, right? So because a mountain is further away from you, so when your voice travels, it is a sound wave, right? It takes slightly longer for it to hit that mountain and bounce back, you know. Now I'm not talking about mountains which are a kilometer away, but in the sense, general sense of the space. Okay, so that's one, that you're talking about reaction of sound, but how does that help music producers? It's not that you're actually going to go in different spaces and record these things, right? For music producers, it's important because acoustics is the fundamental. If you hear things wrong, you can't make judgment in music. It's as simple as that. If you are hearing incorrectly, right, you will make wrong decisions. Okay, so you need to be aware. Like, for example, when I'm mixing something now, you know currently I'm in Delhi. When I'm in Bombay, in my home studio setup, I know that certain frequencies get boosted when I'm playing back music in my speakers, so I know that I have to make that conscious decision to remove those frequencies in the mix because I'm hearing more of it. you know so that's just one quick example. So I'm going to move forward. Okay, so in a way, it is a great Ford. Let me just kind of say that it's a great overall package to get somebody into the serious side of things. Now when we talk about the coursework task that is involved in grade 4, so let me just tell you what all students are expected to do in that. One is that you are expected to differentiate on the basis of listening how between a compressed and a uncompressed recording. Now, if anybody is wondering what a compressor is, I would be happy to answer that question later. Okay. uh, Wait, somebody wants admission. Yeah, but right now, that's one of the coursework tasks. Tell us the difference between a compressed and uncompressed recording. Okay. Second is time signature identification. Ritesh, correct me if I'm wrong, but grade 4 is 6/8, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, for example, music is created in different time signatures. Now, as a music producer, if you don't know what those time signatures are, well, you're in trouble. Let's just put it that way. So it's very important. Like, not everything is 4/4, 4 beats in a bar. It could be 6 beats in a bar. So that's what we are covering in grade 4. We're talking about 6/8 specifically. Then we're talking about semitone and tone identification, and we're also getting into genre identification, funk and R&B being specific to grade 4. Now, the reason we are talking about semitone and tone identification and what kind of genres we want students to know exist is because if you are hearing incorrectly, your references are all wrong, you won't know anything. You won't know how to implement what you've learned. For example, as a music producer, a singer might come up to you and say, hey, I want a funk track. I want you to produce me a funk track. But if poor little you don't know what a funk track is, you're like a headless chicken. Then you'll end up creating what just sounds randomly good to you. So it's important to have genre knowledge. You could always stick to one genre that you like to create. There's no hard and fast rule, but it's always good to know more. That's my point. Okay. So apart from that, the coursework task, which I believe is one of the most important features of the rock school workflow. Okay. Now, in this grade 4 specifically, students are expected to remove, they'll be given a piece of audio, okay, in a folder. They'll be expected to import it into their software and remove unwanted noise from it, basically audio processing, through the means of editing and using things like skills such as cross fading, and also applying different techniques such as noise gating to get desired results. Now now this might sound like, oh, that's it's very simple. That's because we've simplified it in the presentation, but when you actually come down to doing it for somebody who's new to it, trust me, it can be a nightmare to remove noise. It sounds very simple, but it is a nightmare. And if you know how to do that, you know well, it's great. So the point is that you're being made aware that sound music is not perfect, sound is not perfect. You might encounter issues such as noise and things like that, especially in the kind of work environments that we work in. Not everybody has acoustical treatment. Not everybody has the best gear out there. And I think the great thing is that because of these skills, what you can do is you can actually have an okay gear. You don't have to spend a lot of money, but you can still get great results. When you know how to modify audio, and I think that's very important because I think I'm pretty sure 50% of people who are thinking about doing music production think, oh, I can't get the same results as the professionals because I don't have the gear, you know. But it's not about the gear. If you have the skills, I know a lot of people who have the worst computers and the worst equipment, but they are putting out the best material, you know, out there, musically speaking, which rival studio recordings, you know. So that's just something to get fired up about. But that's what the coursework task is. So, as I'll quickly going to go to the previous slide once, if you talk about studio equipment and functions, audio formats, the plugins and stereo mic techniques, think about it. If you're recording correctly, right, using those techniques, you know, using the studio equipment correctly as mentioned in the highlights, and you have an understanding of acoustics, there is no way that you will screw this up, because we have already kind of, it's a step by step guide. Get it? So that's my point. So coursework might sound simple, but it is actually an amalgamation of all that coursework funneled into one little task, and if you nail it, it actually means you actually have a good grasp of whatever's been taught to you, so with that, I'm going to move on to grade 5, which is, in my opinion, I was telling Ritesh, I think it's so, for the level at what it is, or you get to know, you get so much information, it's crazy. This is professional level. I mean, I'm not kidding. So let's get into this, and just a disclaimer that if some of these things get slightly confusing for you in terms of terminologies and what I mean by that, please just make little notes, because this is where, now I can tell you, like, whoever does grade 5, okay, and passes grade 5 has the ability to at least start interning at professional recording studios. I can tell you that, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so what are we talking about in grade 5? We are talking about studio routing, busing, auxiliary channels, and patch bays. Now, studio routing, okay, what I really mean by that is how you make different software and hardware interact with each other in a studio setting. Meaning, nowadays, of course, at the end of it, you can do everything within what we call in the box production, right? Everything can be provided internally in your laptop, right? But in big studios, even in India, we talk. Let's talk about, for example, Yashat Studios. If you see their photos, oh my God, they have the best gear in India. You know, compressors, gates, limiters, microphones. They've got everything. But how do you make all that analog gear interact with your computer? You need to know that, right? I mean, if I give you a piece like a laptop and a compressor and an EQ which is in hardware format and say, hey, connect this, you'll be lost, right? So I think, and signal routing is so important because there's so many different workflows that come out of this. Simple thing is, you could put a compressor before recording vocals just to capture the peaks, you know, and give your voice a bit of a flavor. Applies to me, instruments as well. Other way is that you could mix out of the box, meaning you could send all your audio stems out of your laptop or out of your system, process them through a mixing console, for example, an analog mixing console, be it an SSL or an Eve, and then bring them back into your DAW. You know, how do you do that? How do you create those busing options? So grade 5 dives into that, you know, so that you're not completely lost. Because a lot of times what happens, and this is something I've seen, a lot of music producers, because they're so used to the bedroom environment, because that's how things are these days, right? Like you have access that you can produce music. If I put those people who are just bedroom producers in a studio, they literally freak out. Reason, because they don't know that workflow, they're alien to it, you know they haven't ever researched it, how recording used to happen. I mean, think about it. Nowadays, the millennials were born without tape or without even CD. Some of them, think about that. right? I mean, I come from an era where I used to buy cassettes, and there was Porter Studios, which used to record on a tape recorder. Tascam Porter Studios. Ritesh, you would be familiar with those, I'm sure. So we come from people my age and ones who are older to me come from an era where we've seen that transition from analog to digital. And previous generations to us would say the same to us, that, oh, you don't know how to do this, because that's just the way things are, right? But it is a true fact that that because computers make it easy for us. Now it's about clicking with a mouse rather than actually cutting tape and sticking them together to make a cut. You feel entitled, right? So when you see people who are just so much into the digital workflow go into a professional recording studio, they flip, they go blank, you know so it is extremely important for you to know how professional studios even now work. And a lot of them are based on routing, busing, auxiliaries, and patchways, because a professional studio is basically facilitating interaction of these amazing pieces of equipment and musical instruments with amazing microphones to offer a client the workflow that is offered by the best of analog as well as digital. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is digital audio theory. This is the most dreadful subject in music production and audio engineering. Trust me, I've done it. I know how many hours I spent in it. Okay. Now, this is now for those people who are wondering, oh, do I need to be a mathematics student or a physics student? This is one subject which, if you know physics, does help to understand it technically more, but it's not necessary, but it does help. Okay, this is the only field, this and acoustics, those are the only subjects that within music production, that if you have a science background, helps a little, but it's not necessary. So I hope I've answered that question. Do I need to be a science student to pursue music production? Answer is no. You can be a humanities or art student as well, and you'll do just as well. Okay, just to clarify. So in digital audio theory, we primarily talk about sample rate and bit depth. And I've obviously written the history because it is very important for you to understand where those values come from. Now, just answer this question quickly. You must have seen that in audio formats, there is this format called 44.1 16-bit. You know, that's the CD format. You must have heard of it, correct? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So does anybody know why we have a sample rate of 44.1 on audio and a bit depth of 16-bit? Does anybody know why? Okay. So let me quickly explain. What is bit depth? Now, I literally bit depth can be equated to how we talk about cameras and pixels, right? We all know that in any image, if we have more number of pixels, there is more detail in it, correct? So meaning that when, for example, if you're taking a photograph with a 10 megapixel camera versus a 20 megapixel camera or a 30, chances are when you actually print out that image, the 20 megapixel one would be sharper. Why? Because there's more information, right? In terms of pixels. Bit depth is exactly the same in the audio field. You know, we started out, if you listen to, old video games like Super Mario, Terminator, and all those console games, arcade games as we call them, they sound very comical, right, to us, right? Because the sounds are very funny. It's not because they were funny. They weren't composed to make them sound funny. It's because of the bit depth being 8-bit as opposed to what we have now, which is 16, 24 being the most popular. And we also now have 32-bit, but we don't use that right now, but 16 and 24 is what we are going with right now. But back in the day, we started with 8-bit because computers or digital simulations couldn't recreate what we were playing as an output. Okay. So bit depth really talks about the fidelity of sound. So a lot of people, when they're buying their interfaces, they think that if they have a more bigger sample rate availability in their audio interfaces, they will actually get better sonic results. Now, that might be subjectively true in certain cases. I won't disregard that, but it is not that. It is actually the bit depth that is giving the fidelity to your signal, which is why it's very important to record. For example, we record music at 24-bit. And so a few people record at 32-bit float rate as well, but primarily 24. And then when we are bouncing music for audio consumption, we bring down the bit rate to 16 bit, which is more consumer friendly in terms of space and audio formats, in terms of how it is read by algorithms and things like that. Okay. But that's one. Sample rate, is basically how a computer captures, a digital system captures sound. Okay, that's what sample rate really means. So you will notice that in different audio interfaces, you have things like, oh, sample rate on offer 44.1, 48 kilohertz. You have 96, 192 kilohertz. You know, now all of that is actually based on a digital audio theory theorem, which is called the Nyquist theorem. Now, this might go over your head sometime right now, but still listen to me so that you know where the information in the coursework is coming from. That's why I'm trying to explain it. Okay. Now, the Nyquist theorem actually says that in order to reproduce a sound wave, which is analog in nature, right? Because it's being physically produced. In order to recreate it digitally, because now we interact on DAWs in computers, we're not just directly recording to tape machines, right? You need to sample that waveform twice. Meaning, when you're converting an analog signal, which is a sine wave, right, into a digital signal, which is basically being communicated in a language called binary. The computer understands binary, which is 0 1 0 1. That's how it communicates. So, in order for the computer to understand, oh, this person has performed a C followed by a D followed by an E, right? Literally, what the sound card and the audio interface along with with the computer they're doing is they're checking twice. Okay, this is the sound wave produced. Let me check that again. Okay, so there's a two check process going on, which is what the Nyquist theorem states, that in order to recreate a sound wave from a physical form into a binary form, you have to sample it twice. Now, think about this. Our base sample rate is 44.1 kilohertz, right? That's what it says. Now, human hearing range is from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. Okay. Meaning that we pick up frequencies which rest between 20 hertz on the lower end to the 20,000 hertz, which is 20 kilohertz. Okay. Now, think about it. If you had to recreate this, as if you were a computer, you would have to sample it twice, right? Which means you get to 40, right? If you double 20, that's 40, right? Plus you add a bit of buffer, you know, you get to 40, you somehow arrive at 44.1, you know. That's my point. But the thing is, how did we get here? We take certain things we take for granted, but it is important because, for example, are you delivering your music for video? Then 44.1 is not the right sample rate for you, because otherwise you'll have pitching issues when you sync it with video in different softwares. Usually we deliver sample rates of 20 or 48 for video work and post production. The other thing is also that, for example, if you're uploading music to Spotify and Apple iTunes and things like that, you know what they will do is you'll most probably deliver in 16 bit, you know and even if you deliver in 24 bit, they will downsample it, you know to 16 bit, because that is how you consume audio, 16 bit 44.1. But when you look at ads and films, there we are always delivering 124 bit and 48 kilohertz. So what are the reasons behind that? So digital audio theory covers that. Sorry, I've taken slightly longer in this particular thing, but I think it's important. So that's something that's covered. Now, the third thing that you will notice is I've written network standards. Now, let me just quickly elaborate on network standards, what I mean by that. We are also talking about how to make different machines. When I say machines, computers within the same studio interact with each other. So, for example, let's say you're working in an environment where there is studio A, studio B, studio C, three studios within one big studio, and that does happen these days, right? Now, let's say you worked in Studio A on day one, okay? But day two, Studio A is not available. You're forced to work in Studio B, okay? Studio number two, which has a different machine altogether, completely different system. So what happens? Do you go to Studio A and copy your stuff in a hard drive and then bring it in Studio B? That's what you would think you would have to do, right? Well, the answer is no, because through the means of Ethernet, Wi-Fi, and everything, now I can access whatever recording sessions I had in Studio A and access them and still work on them from Studio B. And then whenever Studio A is available, I can go back and resume my work. But this requires certain protocols within your DAW, otherwise, how will you access your files over the Ethernet, right? So that's something that is covered. And I think it's important if you are planning to take this up professionally and you plan to work in various studios, as a professional, you know, so we're covering that. Okay. When we talk about studio routing, remember the first point I made was interaction of analog gear and digital gear, meaning the computer. We're also talking about DAW internal and external routing. How do you get your software, be it Logic, Pro Tools, Ableton, um, Cubase? Yes, that's another one. So all those softwares to interact, with that analog gear, and things like that. So we're talking about that. Moving on, in grade 5 is what I see as one of the most important and enjoyable features, which is multi mic technique. And I've written drums because it's the most popular on drums these days, because although multi mic techniques are basically using various mics on one single source to get certain results. Let me give you a quick example. I keep mentioning Elvis because that's, I think, a good starting point, or even Beatles for that matter. When the Beatles recorded, started recording, you would actually have just one microphone overlooking the drums or facing the drums. Okay, somewhere between the kick and the snare, or on top of the drum kit as an overhead mic. That's one mic. That evolved into two mics, then three. Right now, currently in 2021, for a full on pop rock production, the minimum mics, and I'm a minimalist, I would use is 10. Okay. But if you listen to anything from Bon Jovi, Metallica, those kind of bands, okay, they're putting not 12, they're probably putting 16 to 18 mics in the entire room, not just on the drum kit, but on the entire performance. Room mics, close mics, two mics on the snare. Now, you might say, okay, it's just pointing mics at a source. Well, it is, but when you put multiple mics on the same source, the biggest issue is phasing, meaning because uh, it's the same sound hitting these microphones at different times, and all these microphones have different polar patterns how they pick up sound. you know so a lot of times amateurs end up creating more damage or in terms of audio than getting necessary results, because one, they don't know how mics interact on a source correctly, and how mics interact with each other when they're pointed towards a certain direction. So multi mic techniques are extremely effective, not only for recording drums, but let's say you want to record a live band. And this is, where, if you remember, I was talking about the differences between music production and audio engineering. This is where the line becomes even thinner, because they kind of overlap if you think about it, right? You might say, oh, but this is not music production. Well, sure, you as a music producer, you might not physically go and record a drum kit or something like that, but it's always, you might, as a music producer, might want to some at some point add some live elements to your production. It's not all MIDI, right? So sometimes you might get great engineers and sometimes you might not, even in the best of studios. So it's always good to know how to implement a certain sound, because different miking techniques will give you completely different sounds. I would record drums for a funk band completely differently, and the choice of microphones, the positioning would be completely different from, let's say, if I was recording metal, you know because and for that matter, jazz is completely different, you know because the dynamic range that you're dealing with is also quite different in all these three examples, right? So therefore, my choices of microphones, where I record them, how I record them, how many mics I put on them, is also based on that, right? What kind of genre am I catering to? Jazz is more laid back, so I don't need the drums to necessarily cut through. It's more about just giving uh, a nice rhythm, not for big band jazz, but overall jazz. I'm talking jazz standards and things like that. Metal, the drums are much more in front. In fact, drums are one of the loudest things in metal records. So implementation is different. So that's something that's covered in grade 5. Multi mic techniques for drums specifically, but we also dive into other instruments. Okay. And finally, in the theory side of things, we're talking about controllers, triggers, and pickups. Now, controllers are basically, keyboards, MIDI keyboards, and MIDI pads designed to interact with your virtual instruments that we covered in grade 4. Okay. Triggers, and pickups. Basically, let me just quickly tell you what those are. Triggers are usually used on drums. Okay. Meaning, when I mic up a drum kit, okay, and you will hear this most widely used in rock and metal genres, mostly. Okay. So, and also it's great for people, by the way, who want to dive maybe into live sound mixing, because triggers are something that we use in the live scenario on drums. Okay. So what a trigger does is that they're little devices that you can put on the heads of different acoustic drums. So when you're recording the acoustic drums through the means of mics, the trigger is also picking up that hit and how loud or soft that hit might be. And that data is stored as a MIDI file. Okay. And then you can actually use a sampler, which we are talking about in grade 4, to put any sound on it. So what that allows you to do is, let's say you recorded a sound, a drum kit, and after you've recorded the entire song with the guitarist, the bass player, all that stuff, you're like, everything's great, but I don't like the snare sound. What do? Will you ask your drummer to come back and record every hit again with a different snare sound? No, you wouldn't, right? That would be counterproductive, right? So think of triggers as a backup. You can actually use that trigger information to actually load a new sound, a snare sound, replace the original, and there you have a solution. So it's almost like a backup. You know, what that does is it dehumanizes the performance a little, even now. Which is why if you notice all these modern metal songs, it almost sounds like the kick drum, for example, sounds like you hitting a basketball on a cement bass, tuck tuck tuck. Very thumpy and uh very, I don't know how to explain it. It is a triggered sound. That's how I explain it. But thing is, it sounds very mechanical, right? you know and it was like it became a benchmark for certain band sounds, actually. If you're talking about extreme metal bands like Meshuggah or uh Bullet for My Valentine, or those kind of bands, like pop, not popular, but like kind of mainstream bands, Lamb of God, those kind of bands, where they actually used to replace the sound of the kick and the snare, leave everything rest, and Arch Enemy is another good example of that, where every sound has been replaced. you know and if you think about it in a live setting, it works the best. Think about it, because when you are performing live as a drummer, right, what tends to happen is you might get different drum kits at different places. You might get different sound systems, meaning you'll have inconsistent results, right? Whereas if I actually put drum triggers on everything, I can actually re-trigger the sound that I recorded on the album in a controlled environment and recreate that sound live. So it has its uses and it has its disadvantages, but you'll be able to tell once only you know what they do. So that is covered. Pickups, when you're talking about pickups, we're talking about MIDI pickups on guitars and things like that. Excuse me. So, meaning, how do you perform something on the guitar and turn that into MIDI information, which can, let's say, maybe be turned into a piano sound or a violin sound. I'm a guitar player, right? So not necessarily that I know how to play the keyboard, so I can actually just play it on my guitar with a MIDI pickup and use that MIDI information to trigger different virtual instruments. So that's something that's covered in the theory part of it. Now let's talk about the listening tests that are involved with grade 5 specifically. Okay, we are now getting into slightly more specific things like identification of frequency ranges. Okay, now let me just elaborate a little. Ritesh, please do keep a time check on me. If you feel I'm spending too much time on something, please let me know. You go.
Cool. You have about 20 minutes to
Oh,
complete this
fantastic.
content, then we can have a question and answer.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that should be good enough. So, anyway, so when we talk about identification of frequency ranges, it is You might think it's very technical and very specific, because obviously you have different frequency ranges, going from low end to high end. So you've got your lows, your low mids, high mids, and of course the treble area. But if you think about it in practical terms, and I want to talk about it in practical terms for a second, okay? A lot of times musicians and music folk, as I call them, including myself, we don't talk about music in terms of technicals. We talk about music in terms of feeling, right? Certain sounds and certain pieces of music make you feel a certain way. And I think that's the right approach. That's music is supposed to imbibe a certain feeling in you, right? And trust me, I have had clients who will come to me and say, can you make this sound more blue, right? I want it to sound more blue. Now you might think it's some arty fellow trying to be all cool, but what he's trying to say is he wants the feeling of gloominess, sadness, right? Which means perhaps in terms of technical, he doesn't want things to be too bright. Perhaps, right? He doesn't want everything in your face. Gloomy means sad, which means reserved, right? So how do I translate that to a difference in the way I mix? I would say, okay, he wants something blue, meaning he wants something that's more reserved, meaning something that's not in your face, number one, which means the treble frequencies have to be muted or controlled. Alternatively, he or she could say, could be trying to tell me he wants something more natural sounding, because feeling blue is in emotion, right? Right. So I would relate it to that. And and I can tell you this, every emotion that you feel, you can actually relate it to a certain frequency range. And that's what this is all about. You know, why do party numbers sound like a party number? I can guarantee if you mix it wrong, you'll make a party number sound like the worst ballad out there, even if it's fast paced, right? If you'll notice that these days, like all the dance numbers are very in your face, right? Rhythms everywhere, sidechain synthesizers, vocals tuned to perfection, all that stuff. That's a controversial thing, but excuse me. But my point is, you can't make these decisions unless you know what kind of sonic identity these frequency ranges carry. Okay. And that's what this listening test is all about. Okay. Because only when you know the frequencies can you can you basically equate it to an emotion within music, and that comes with time. It doesn't say, oh, please increase 80 hertz for adding life to your music, or things like that. That's just your, how you deduct all that information. But identification of frequency ranges is very important because, one, like I said, it allows you to make your music more, you know full of emotion. One. Second, think about it this way, right? When you're listening to music, 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz is our human hearing range, right? Now, I always say this, that look at the space between your speakers as canvas, right? Okay. Now, whether you're using one shade or 10 shades, right, of different colors, right? Not shades, colors, one colors or 10 colors, right? Or using one color with 10 shades. At the end of it, there are 10 different things, right? And it is important for you to think of it as a sonic canvas, that you have to fill up that frequency spectrum in order to make something sound complete. Now, I don't mean that you have to fill in every frequency, don't get me wrong, but it should be balanced to a certain extent, right? So, how can you do that? Because every musical instrument has a certain frequency range. You know, if you know those, you'll be able to implement multiple instrument recordings and productions in a more thoughtful manner. You know, like I've heard productions where violas, the instrument viola, okay, or let me give you a more extreme example. I've heard productions in which cellos are being used, the cello sound is being used on a C5 on a MIDI keyboard. Well, the truth is, if you want the C5, you don't use cellos, you use violins, you know, you know. I mean, and then you might say, oh no, that's my musical creativity. Fine. If that's what you're going for, I'm all up for experimentation, but don't do it without being informed. You know, for example, in orchestration, that's a no, complete no. I would never use a cello sound for a violin sound, or vice versa, to get that lower register or that higher register in a classical music setting or score creation. I might do it if I was Radiohead. I mean, think about it that way. So if you're experimental, know what your output is going to be, and what it is for. In order to understand that, you need to know this. Okay. The second thing is that we are talking about chord recognition. Now, the reason is, like, for example, as a music producer, or even an engineer for that matter, you will come across musicians, and you need to, and even if you're a musician transitioning into becoming a music producer, and let's say you don't have the training, the theoretical training of music, then it is important for you to understand what, at least what different chords sound like and what feeling they might imbibe in you. In grade 5, we're talking about, I think, major sevens diminished. Am I correct, Ritesh? Major sevens and diminished.
Yeah, that's what you
Exactly.
shared last time. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So the point is that, so those are so point is that in the listening test, we're not just talking about frequency ranges, we're also talking about, we're helping you grow as a musician, even if you're not a musician, irrespective of whether you are or not. But it's important to know what different chords sound like, and what complex and simple chords are, and how you can use them in your music. Okay. The third thing being, of course, identification of swing beats. Swing is very important in genres like R&B, jazz, and hip hop. Surprisingly, I mean, you might think hip hop sounds really tight, but a lot of the beats that you hear, are swing beats. When I say swing, means that they're not mathematically on the bar or on the beat. They have a certain movement to them. Now, now you might not notice that movement if you don't know what a state beat sounds like versus a swinged beat, you know. But in order to get a swing beat, you need to know what it sounds like, and I think the listening test is like absolutely amazing for that. You'll actually hear the difference. And of course, in grade 5, we're talking about, and like I said, it's these things because they're more used most widely in jazz, hip hop, and even R&B. R&B is, I think, an offshoot of hip hop and jazz kind of combined, I feel, to an extent. uh, so the genres we are talking about in grade 5 are jazz and hip hop, because they're much more complex in terms of beats, and also in terms of the chord choices that are used usually. you know so moving on, the coursework task for grade 5, I think this grade really starts testing you as a music producer. Up till grade 4, it's like rock school's preparing you to be a music producer. you know Now, I feel grade 5 is the first stepping stone. I really feel that, because what you're allowed to, what you're basically given, let me just elaborate, is you're given a folder with certain sound files, which is already arranged, produced, recorded for you. Okay. Your task is to basically to add musical layers to the provided tracks. Okay. With the use of virtual instruments. Okay. Because those are readily available to all of us, no matter what DAW you might be using, Ableton, Logic, Pro Tools, doesn't matter, And that's another great thing. I feel that, you have that sense, so you can use whatever you're comfortable with, you know, in terms of a DAW. You don't have to stick to one particular thing, because different things work for different people. I work on 4 5 different DAWs, and I still can't sometimes figure out what is the all-round best for whatever. For scoring, I use Logic. For mixing, I use Pro Tools. For producing in general, I use Ableton, you know things like that. I even used Studio One, although their service is bad, but let's not get into that. But coming back to the coursework task, okay, that it is really testing your arrangement skills and your sound design skills. Now, when I say sound design usually refers to you actually creating sounds. Okay. But the reason I bring up that term is because, in a way, when you're sculpting different sonic landscapes around the provided material, it is sound design in a way, right? you know oh, should I use a cello, should I use a violin, should I use a Moog monophonic synth emulation, or should I use some other VST? That's basically a creative choice, and everybody will do it differently. And that's, I think, something that's amazing. I can guarantee you that if 10 people are giving the course grade 5 exam, not one will sound the same, because that's just music, that's your creativity. But all of them will follow a certain standard. You know, they when I say a certain standard, what I really mean is that when, let's say, student A and student B, let's say one is using Ableton, one is using Logic, different set of tools for them, right? Now, their products, their arrangement and sound designs implementation might completely sonically sound different. But in terms of an academic level, they'll still be at the same point because that's how the courses are laid out. That is what I'm trying to say. So irrespective of, some people have this, and this has been asked of me by a few graded students, I believe, that, oh, can I use third party virtual instruments, meaning virtual instruments that go beyond what is available in your DAW? Well, because some of them do sound great and they sound better because they're more expensive, and things like that. What does that mean, that you're going to get a distinction for using an expensive audio library? Well, the answer is no. We're not testing, oh, how expensive is your virtual instrument. We're testing how you're going to arrange. Get it? So people who are under this impression that, oh, if I have better virtual instruments or use third party, gear, will that give me an advantage? Probably not, because like I said, the examiners are such professionals that they know, you know, when there's something poorly arranged and designed, but they're getting the advantage because they're using a better sound source versus, let's say, a really well designed arrangement with normal VSTs. They would know the difference. And I think that, if you think about it, that is great because that eliminates, that bridges that gap, right? What we really talked about in the beginning, that you need good gear to make good music. No, you need the right intention to make good music, I feel. And I think that's where I want to kind of, take. Sorry? Uh, I'll continue. I believe that must have been my mistake. Yeah. So, yeah. So, my point being that with the coursework task provided in grade 5, that is the most awesome thing, that at the end of it, y- once you've done it, you'll actually feel, okay, I've achieved something. And that's one thing that's awesome with every grade. And with every grade, you will feel there's an exponential rise in your skill level, you know and you will feel that you're arriving at the next step. you know there's progress. You can feel that progress. And I'm not just saying that because I work with Rock School. I'm really not saying this. Even before I joined Ritesh and Rock School India as a consultant, even before that, we were talking about the coursework that is provided by Rock School. And I can tell you that what grade 5 is teaching you right now, I learned in my first year of the degree program I did in sound engineering. There you go. So such information which is degree level is being funneled down to people who are even hobbyists, which is great, I think. So that's something to keep in mind, that at the end of it, we're not discriminating your output based on what kind of gear you have. Okay, you are purely scored and given the credits based on the skill level that you achieve through learning through our material. So I think that's very, very important these days, I feel. Because otherwise you get a sense of entitlement that, oh, just because I have better gear, I'll get better results. Absolutely no. So if any of you had that notion in your head that, oh, I need expensive things to sound great, nowadays, no, you don't. you know so anyways, let's move forward quickly. So what is, let's talk about, what is the objective of, be it grade 4, grade 5, or any of these grades, exams within Rock School, as far as music production goes. So the one thing that I obviously previously mentioned is that the systematic learning process yields more output, in the sense that at every grade, like I said, you'll have a sense of achievement. You've learned something. And because you've taken your own time to develop those skills, it will stay longer. It is not just about fulfilling the idea of giving an exam. It's not like a typical Indian academic exam that that we have to prepare for and just get good marks because you need to get somewhere. It actually leaves an impression, something that you will remember. And that's how all the courses are designed. So that's one. you know The other thing is that because we are talking about not just theory, we're talking about practical skills and we're talking about listening skills. As mentioned in the first slide, that 60% of our course, of the exam is actually dedicated to the coursework task, right? And the rest is, of course, 25% for theory and 15% for listening, right? So what that yields is an all-round development for you as a music producer. You know, you're not only focusing on the practical, but you're also focusing on the theory. So you're backed up by good information. You know, Going back to the fact that all these books are created by people who are the best in the field, and not exaggerating, they are. You know, the objective of the rock school music production thing is that you get all-round development through systematic learning, basically. And advancement in your skill, which you will see and you will notice through each grade. And that's something that's I think fantastic, because a lot of times we get into this pressure when, especially in a typical classroom setting, let's say if you're going to an audio engineering school, at basically not a university level but below that, um, and you might feel that, "Oh, I'm not really understanding something, but I have to go with my class." Happens, right? But here you get that flexibility to do things your own way, take your time to understand things, and then attempt the examination when you feel confident. So there's no pressure on you. So I think that's great. So, and I think the most important thing is that, these are skills that really help you support your dreams, because, musicians these days, especially performers like vocalists, guitar players, and artists in general, if you think about it, it's a very dream based thing, right? That you have that dream to make it as a musician, right? And a lot of musicians, in fact, especially with vocalists, that is why there's a big, girl with a vocal mic. I'll tell you why. Because for example, in vocals, when you're singing, let's say in a room or even singing live, it is a completely different experience to recording yourself on the mic. You know, you have to get used to it. You really do. Because I know so many singers who, in quotes, hate their voice on the mic because they're not used to it. You know, so even for people who are just musicians or trying to pursue a singing career, for example, music production is great. They can create demos, and nowadays with the pandemic and everything, a lot of things are happening in a work from home scenario. Now think about the advantage a singer who knows how to use music production as a skill versus somebody who doesn't know how to use it. You know, think about that. So who's being more successful? A singer who does know how to run the software successfully, knows basics of music production and audio engineering in order to basically do a job for which we cannot get out. So, it's extremely relevant. That's my point. So, what, so I'm just going to tell you, like, what kind of people can look into it. It could be anybody from somebody who's a home studio enthusiast to a professional aspirant, in the sense somebody who's really focusing on taking this up as a career, be it in the audio engineering sector or the music production and arrangement sector. Either way, you're the information provider, like I said, grade 5 onwards, in fact, grade 4 onwards. They're all university level information that is given in the book, you know. So, I mean, you take my word for it. If you, do grade 5 and grade 6, we're not discussing grade 6, but we're talking about, you'll feel like you've done at least the first year of your college education in music production, guaranteed. you know so that's something, I think that's quite advantageous in terms of the amount of information provided. So, it's there's something for everybody. We're also talking about musicians who just want to maybe record demos or want to just dive into it to a point, let's say, where they want to record demos and then maybe go to a studio, and record it professionally. That's also possible, right? But because a lot of times what happens is jamming with friends over a song or with your bandmates is a different experience than actually, and you could, take this experiment, like sometimes you'll, be performing a song that you created and you're like, oh, what a great song. And then maybe you use your phone to record it and you're like, doesn't sound that great, you know. Now the reason it might not sound that great is, one, of course, maybe the performance is different, but usually it adheres to the arrangement, and when you see your music laid out in front of you within the software, you get different ideas. on arranging the music. How long do you want the chorus to be? How long do you think the verse is too short? Things like that. You know, and I think the idea is to get that balance between your creativity and technical skills. You can't let either take over. I feel it has to be a balance, you know. So musicians are looking to create demos or, create, let's say, what we call a song bank. I think it's great for them to just kind of have, basic knowledge at least of how to go about creation of music and music production, so that they can at least communicate their ideas across, you know. And the last one which I want to cover is for, kids and I think students who are, and there are a lot of them who just do this for the sake of academic extracurricular, because rock schools grades are recognized worldwide, with UCAS and those kind of bodies, right? So because when you're applying to universities abroad, what tends to happen is that you get extra points for extracurricular activities, okay, which basically solidifies whether you are getting an admission in that university or not. So, and there are a lot of students who actually might not be related to the music field altogether, but want to do this as an extracurricular to get those points. So if there are any of you out there who are interested in doing a music production program just to get those points, well, we've got you covered in that area as well, you know. So with that, I would like to end my presentation, and I hope I wasn't too much of a bore for you guys. And I hope you also take something away from it. And I think I'll give the floor to Ritesh now to curate the questions.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
everybody can, first of all, thank you so much, Siddharth. I think that
you're
was
welcome,
really
Ritesh.
in-depth covering the content of grade 4 and 5, and that was the idea of the whole presentation.
Yes,
Excellent
yes,
workshop. I think you can stop sharing the screen so we can have everybody on the screen and they can
yes, I'll do that.
ask the questions. You
Yes.
can unmute yourself and ask your questions if you have any.
Yeah. Hi, Siddharth.
Hey, Shubham, what's up?
Yeah.
Well, I have few questions. Like as you discussed, you use a lot of DAWs like Pro Tools, Ableton,
Yeah.
and Logic. So basically, I'm a Logic user, and I
Okay.
teach music production also, and I'm learning
Fantastic.
music production also. So basically, my question is like, a lot of students ask me like they can't buy like iMax or Max for Logic Pro X.
Right.
So is there any like, is it important to learn all DAWs as a teacher or as a producer? What do you feel?
Okay. So the answer is, firstly, see, there's a common thread amongst all DAWs.
Yeah.
Okay. At the end of it, my experience has been that in order to really master a DAW to a intermediate to advanced level, it takes me personally 1 week to adapt from one DAW to another. And rest is all practice. The more you practice your skill level in any DAW, you'll get used to it. So the first thing I want to clarify is the DAW really doesn't matter. Of course, there are affordable options and non unaffordable options. Pro Tools being unaffordable actually for music creators. And in fact, personally speaking, I would say stay away from Pro Tools for music production. Reason being, up till 2 years ago, I was paying $300 to $400 every year for upgrades on Pro Tools. Okay. Now that made sense for me till a point. I was doing a lot of mixing work. For mixing work, you cannot compete with Pro Tools. It's still the standard, but reason being it's available in every studio worldwide, be it in India, be it in the States, anywhere. So it is more about having a consistent platform. So I think the best way to look at it is that I think still the most, as far as DAWs goes, the most value for money is still Logic. Okay. Although honestly speaking, I find Logic editing very slow for my taste. Okay. A lot of people think Pro Tools editing is slow. So it really depends on what you like and it's a very personal thing. Okay. As far as output goes, it doesn't really matter. But yes, for example, as a teacher for you, I think, now I don't expect you to mug up every shortcut of every DAW out there. You have key commands for that, right? For example, if you are used to working in Logic, you can import your shortcuts into Ableton and vice versa, or in Pro Tools. So it's not that you have to understand it. The rest is just visual displays that are different, I feel, so, but for you as a teacher, I think it's always good to, let's say, take a weekend and, hey, let me explore Studio One today. Let me explore Ableton today, so that if a student has a question for you, you can guide them as to, like, in fact, to teach one of my students, I had to learn Logic really well. True story. Because I hate working on Logic. I'm sorry, I just don't like it. I find it very slow, you know. But for example, if I'm doing background scores, that's actually the software I go to, because everything's there for scoring. Ableton doesn't do it for me, because I can't do different uh, time signatures within the same session even now in Ableton. Think about that, you know. Or think of what I also do, and that's something you could explore, is run different softwares in rewire mode. So basically, sometimes I actually rewire Logic into Ableton and vice versa, depending on my project. So it really depends on that. But I feel it is always great to try out all DAWs and see what works for you. Now, that could be an economic decision, or that could be a workflow decision, right? For example, my favorite workflow based software is Studio One. I love it. The only reason I switched from it was because I wasn't getting the support, the back end support from the company. You know, the other thing is also, if you think about it, and this is something you would know, if you have a query in Logic, it would take you at least 3 to 4 minutes on Google to find the answer to it.
Right.
I can tell you for Ableton, it's less than 30 seconds.
Okay.
And I'm not saying Ableton's better, but you know, so think about that. Do you need more support? Do you need a sense of community with your software? Like Ableton has a great sense of community. It's like the hippie software, right? Of musicians. Think about it, right? You know, are you dealing more with electronic music production, then Ableton's the way to go. But if you're doing multiple things like scoring, arranging background scores, Logic is better. Even Cubase, for that matter, is quite consistent. You know, like I used Cubase 3.5, so you know how far back I am. Before that, because after that I switched to Pro Tools, right? So like I said, I think as a teacher, try everything for yourself. I think import key commands from Logic into Ableton and stuff, and see what works for you. Because for example, the tempo algorithms in Ableton are unbeatable. So if you want to kind of time warp things and stuff like that, so maybe if I have to beat match and sample things, I would probably use Ableton, run it and rewire. Although, you know, nowadays even the latest version of Logic is very similar. You know, they've began with the grid, you know, production and things like that. So like I said, it really doesn't matter. You know, as long as you have, whether it's and for Windows, I think I would personally feel that Ableton or Cubase would work more very consistently, from what I understand. So it's not necessary to have a Mac system. No, in no ways, no.
Yeah, because main disadvantage is like Logic can only be run on Mac. So, and everyone can't buy a Mac. So that's why I face problem like what to answer the students. Like they
Okay,
have,
think about it this way. Okay, think
Yeah.
about it this way.
yeah,
If a Mac costs 1 lakh rupees and Logic is 15,000 for a license, is 1.15 lakhs. Just
yes,
saying.
yes,
Versus Cubase is, I think, 35,000 rupees for a license.
yes,
Plus you buy a Lenovo for 60,000, baat wahi padti hai.
yes. I
Know what
answer
I'm-
the same thing. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. But in order to answer that, you can always send emails to these manufacturers to give you a student discount. Like Ableton does that. You'll get 30% off on it. So does Logic. I'm pretty sure Rock School, I don't count me on it, but I'm sure Rock School can help you out. Maybe with some, you know, getting some nice deals on for your students under the Rock School category to get some educational deals. But don't quote me on it. We'll have to check with Ritesh for that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am actually in talk with a company called Trimac. They have a lot of pro brands with them, and we will be working on, depending on, see, everybody wants numbers. So more students and more teachers who actually start pursuing the exams, bigger the audience we have, bigger discounts we can get you guys. So
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
it's a business thing, really.
Yeah. Anyways, should we move on? Hope that answered your question, Shubham.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Madan, you had a question, I think.
Yeah. I had a question, actually a similar question, that you
Yeah.
know, the students they are interested in music, but then regarding the DAW thing, like, you know, they were asking because Apple as a company provides a student discount if you buy any Apple products, basically.
Right.
So I was also coming to that point, because Logic also is an Apple product. So if in case if RSL can maybe kind of issue a certificate, okay, the student or something like that, which I will talk to you later with regards to that, Ritesh. Also,
Yeah.
the other thing is, the most common question that I get is basically, now Rock School comes up with this graded examination, which makes it very easy, because if you're at a particular level, you just give that kind of a grade. You don't need to complete that. But then the question that I get is, okay, how is it comparable with Yash Raj, SAE, Berkeley and stuff, because those are like 3-year diploma and then you get a certification like that.
Okay.
And then then I don't really have the answer, but then I say that okay, the benchmark is probably if you complete grade 3, grade 4, this is like the first year diploma. Or if you complete the grade 5 and above, that's like okay, second year diploma, you can work in the industry or something like that. I have to give them the answer, but I genuinely I myself don't know the exact answer what to
Okay.
give them.
From my experience, because I've done like
Yeah.
a formal education, sound engineering,
Yeah.
I can tell you from personal experience that whatever is till grade 5
Okay.
is what I learned in my first year of college,
Okay.
a degree program. Okay. Because second year for me and so on and so forth were all about surround sound. Things
Okay.
like Decca trees, 5.1 surround sound miking techniques and things like that,
Yeah.
and implementing those. I recorded a 70-piece orchestra in my second year.
Okay.
But let me tell you, so that's one way to look at it, that you'll up till grade 5, more or less, I'm giving you a ballpark, is
Okay.
professionally speaking, year 1 of a degree program. Okay. But
Okay.
the only difference, to answer your other question, is as far as these other institutes go, which are what I call regular institutes, where
Regular.
classes happening, you're going to campus, right? There are two differences. One is, of course, the tag of the degree. So if that's important to you, somebody might want to go for that. I want a degree. Okay. In terms of information, easily up till grade 8, first 2 years of a degree program of music production or audio engineering. Okay. The other way to find out is also, I think, and Ritesh, correct me if I'm wrong here, is the points, academic points it carries in the international standard. Like for example, if you do a degree from abroad or even in India, it has a certain UCAS level point, right? So you can see the point scoring of those versus the rock school courses to maybe look at them, weigh them out on a global scale. That's a good way to also look at it. If you just purely look at their numbers, as far as the experience goes, the educational experience, the information is exactly the same.
Okay.
The other thing is, I think the advantage that rock school has, and this is a very honest one, I'm thinking, some of these, especially the courses that are offered in India, I won't name any institute, man, they're expensive for what
Yeah.
they're offering. And the faculty, well, questionable to say the least, not the best out there,
Yeah.
you don't want to pay lakhs and lakhs of rupees and have a kid teach you. You need
Exactly.
people who have at least, I think, at least 5 to 10 years of experience in the field in order to impart that education correctly, right? So a lot of institutes are very expensive. That's also a cost factor. Somebody might not have 2-3 lakh rupees a year to spend on education. Let's just face it, that's how it is. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. You can't afford it, you can't afford it. But
Exactly.
does that mean that you give up on your dream? No, of course not. So I think it offers you that flexibility, because at the end of it, whether you go to uni or whether you practice at home,
Yeah.
both need practice.
Exactly.
Okay. So either way, you'll be fine. That's
Yes.
I think, yes. But to authenticate what you said, I think the UCAS system is the best way to look at the points each grade offers on a global scale. Yes.
On a global scale. So basically, the point is, like as you rightly said, the institute from where you were learned is basically up till grade 5 is the first year of the
More or less,
diploma,
yeah.
and then up to grade 8 is the second year of diploma.
Yeah.
But then here, I can explain that here you have the flexibility that you don't have to do it within 2 years time. You take your time and maybe complete it within 3 to 4 years also.
Absolutely.
Like,
Or quicker.
yeah.
Or quicker.
Or maybe
I
quicker
don't-
also. If you're good at it, then yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, because for example, if let's say you there are a lot of music producers and engineers who actually have learned only by being in the job.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe they want some sense of a credit to their name. They haven't done
Exactly.
diplomas or degrees, but they want to get this for themselves. More importantly, they might be like, okay, let me just straight away give grade 8, because they have that skill level, right?
They have, yeah.
And you
Exactly.
can and I'm not too sure, but I mean, it's for a newbie, I don't recommend skipping grades for a person who's fresh into it. But for somebody, let's say, who has 3-4 years of experience who's working in the field, sure, you can start with grade 4 straight away. You know,
Okay.
like I have a student who's 45 years old right now. Okay.
Okay.
And he was considering giving these exams, and he said, so do I have to give grade 1 to 8? I was like, and he runs a studio, by the way.
Oh, wow.
He runs a recording studio, so it's not that he doesn't know stuff. So I actually told him, I said, why don't you look at first giving grade 3, then maybe grade 5, just so that it's not a sudden jump, and then straight away give grade 8. So it really depends. So that would be my answer to you. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
No, nice.
Savio, I think
Thanks.
you have a question to ask.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi.
I'm Esha Kalwal from Trichy. Good
Yeah.
afternoon, all.
Good afternoon.
Sir, can we advise basic students for the BandLab software that is online? It's free, no? I think. BandLab.
Oh, BandLab. So
Yeah.
in fact, a free software which
Yeah.
has full features of
Yeah.
any other DAW, I would actually recommend Reaper.
Okay.
REAPER, because if, let's say, that you have students who want all the features that are available in Pro Tools, Logic, and all these softwares, because BandLab and GarageBand are basically simplified versions of full-fledged DAWs. So while I think up to grade 3 or 4, you could I think till grade 3, honestly, you can still work with things like GarageBand. With grade 4, because we're involving virtual instruments, although there are some available in GarageBand, but that is a Mac only, like I said. I would still recommend that you go for a full-fledged DAW. And if, let's say, somebody does not want to invest in a DAW, they could check out Reaper. It's free. Reaper, yes. And it's pretty great. I know a lot of people who use it, and it's free, like I said. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Mr. Savio, you have a question, please?
There's a question from regarding Splice. I can. The chat is here. Okay. So, okay.
That
Anyways.
is just a suggestion, basically. Yeah. So.
Okay. So I don't have to look into that. Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Savio.
Can you suggest us to make a home studio which specs like which mic is much better in budget way about interface and all?
Okay. So it really, like I said, it really depends on your budget. Do you want me to segregate, give you like specific brand names and models? Is that what you want me to do?
Yeah, model and brand names regarding that in.
Okay.
For home studio.
Sir, may I recommend that you email this question to Siddharth?
Yes,
so
I would.
Yeah, that would be a better thing to do.
Yes.
You have his email ID in the chat.
Yeah,
Yes,
but something to just one thing I would like to add to your thing is, do mention if you have acoustical treatment in your space or not. Okay, because if you don't have acoustical treatment, I'm pretty sure you might be thinking of buying a condenser mic. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yes, please don't do that if you don't have acoustical treatment. That's my point. You can go because it will catch. It's very sensitive, right?
Yes.
So and this is good information. I think if you have acoustical treatment, you can go for a condenser mic. If you don't and don't plan to invest in any acoustical treatment, you're actually better off with a dynamic mic. Okay, because they're less sensitive. So in other words, in very Indian style, if you don't want the rickshawala's horn to come into your recording, please go for a dynamic mic unless you have soundproofing or think of at least getting sound absorption panels. Number one. Okay. Number two, nowadays, at every budget, you're getting some very good quality. I can tell you that between an audio interface that costs 10,000 rupees and maybe 50,000, audibly you won't be able to tell the difference. You can tell a difference between the one that costs 50,000 and 2 lakh rupees. That is for sure. I can guarantee you that. But up to a consumer level, just go with your needs in terms of the inputs and outputs you might require. Okay. The famous companies that are out there: Focusrite, Presonus, Apogee. I personally do recommend Apogee. But go with whatever suits your budget. They all do a good job, but make sure that the idea is to get less latency and have clean preamps. So you can send me. I can give you specifics of what you might want to go for. Okay, so send me an email. I'll definitely give you some recommendations. But just right off the bat, if somebody else has that question, condenser versus dynamic, if you don't have treatment, please don't get.
Yeah. And
Yes.
one more thing, sir.
Yes.
Does it affect any? To teach the children about the sound production, being as a teacher,
Yeah.
this equipment is it affect any like what do you say that? Is it affects about the models and brands?
So,
Professional way. Yeah.
see, I would say if you're, catering to students, it's always good to have a somewhat of a
Minimum
professional,
basic provision.
yeah. I mean, something so that they know how to. Because if you're gonna teach them on a simple basic home studio setup, of course you can do it. For DAW training, by all means, okay. But I think as if you're an institute, for example, it's
Yes.
always great to have at least your DAW, your studio monitors, irrespective of brand, a mixer, a MIDI keyboard, all the things mentioned, the different grades. It's always good to have those so that at least your students have access to them if they don't buy it themselves. As an institute, I think it's our responsibility to at least have that. But in case as an institute, if you feel that you're new to the subject and you want to take some time and develop that category of students first, even then I feel that you should at least have an audio interface with, let's say, a basic system and a legitimate copy of a software, and speakers, so that you can at least give the lectures and the coursework that is involved. That's what I feel. But do you need like a multi-million-dollar mixing console? Maybe not. Yeah, that's my point. So you don't have to invest heavily into it. You can always use photographs, and maybe another way to maybe think about this, you can always speak to, if you don't want to invest in equipment yourself, you can maybe always speak to a good recording studio close by which has equipment, and do some kind of a deal where you can take the students for a practical there. I'm just suggesting, that's also a possibility. Yes.
Is there any special recommended DAW from RSL?
No, not really. No.
Not really.
No,
Okay. Any
it's
can use.
totally up to you. Yeah.
That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Mr. Savio, I've been calling out your name for a while now. Mr.
Yes.
Savio, you have a question, please.
Yes, Siddharth.
Hi, Savio.
My question is, for the past few years, it's been like almost 20 years I've been teaching music. And at the end of grade 8, what I do is that I actually try to, after they do their grade 8 or any, like say grade 5, I always have some kind of a program for them where, like, say, for example, say I make them a company and I try to get them paid, or say in the month of December, they go around playing for some programs. So
Right.
I recommend a certain amount of pay. So I have no experience in terms of production as terms of payment. So what would you recommend for a child, or say a teen who has finished his maybe grade 5 or grade 8 and stumbles upon some kind of a project where his production skills would be used in school or somewhere else where someone is willing to pay him? So what would be your quote, to be honest, like approximate payment?
So are you talking about pay grades in music production?
Yes, they pay grades for small amount just to start, just to get them to, like to encourage them, because I think that that leads to the parents who are feeling fulfilled that at least the whole thing was fruitful, at least some way.
Okay. So the thing is, see, if you are paying them, I think that's totally a token amount, and you're just trying to give them something.
Yeah, exactly.
So I can't comment on that. Itna de do yaar. Matlab, let's be honest. I think that's totally your discretion.
Yes.
If you are talking about industry
Industry, like,
standards, I'll be honest. Music producers get anything from 5,000 rupees a track to 5 lakhs to 10 lakh rupees a track too.
Okay, fine. Is that based on how much time they take to produce it, or is for the quality, or what would you?
I would not consider time as a thing. Obviously, more experienced producers can make things quicker because they're experienced. Like if, like I know people, and where if you're given a track that we have a delivery tomorrow, I can guarantee we can deliver it. Without any changes, that kind of thing, including the mixing and mastering.
Okay.
So, but that comes with experience. But it also depends on the scale of release. For example, if it's a song that is for a film or a major label, of course the stakes are higher. For a commercial ad project, let's say you're doing a car brand or something, of course things are different. But obviously you can't expect as a music producer to get 5 lakh rupees or 1 lakh rupees for an indie band from Delhi, right?
Yeah.
So you have to capture expectations,
Okay,
and I think yes, I mean, just like any career, I think, you go through that. The more experienced you are, the better well known you are, you get more money. Money's, I think, it's a very tricky subject for me,
Yes,
like,
yes, yes. What
you
would
know,
what would you personally recommend for your student who's done grade 8 and maybe one of his some known person tells him to make a YouTube video and just a music for that, say around say 2 minutes long.
I actually don't, I honestly speaking, because I'll tell you why. I've never recommended that you charge a certain amount because everybody
Okay.
knows their own value. For
Yes,
example,
yes.
I'm giving you an example.
Yeah.
Student A, let's not talk about students. Let's say you as a music producer charge, let's say, X amount, which is a 5-digit number. Okay.
Okay.
Now think about you, a person charging 5 digits, telling somebody, oh, charge 4 digits or 3 digits.
Okay.
You're already
Okay.
putting them down.
Yes, yes,
And saying
obviously.
you're
Yes,
better
yes,
than
yes.
them.
Yes,
Right?
yes,
Even
yes.
if that person's your student, right?
Mhm.
I think for younger students, it's good to get something which is time based.
Okay.
Okay. Actually, not time based, quality based. I'll tell you why. Because then otherwise they'll take longer.
Longer.
Because
Okay, okay.
yeah, it should be quality based, I feel. The
Okay.
best way to look at it is that, you know, I think a benchmark is when you have a song produced and you're playing it along with whatever you're hearing on Spotify or Apple Tunes, and you don't
Okay.
hear a sonic difference. You're like, yeah,
Okay.
this is just as good.
Okay.
And at the end of it, like I said, I know producers who charge anything from 3, 4,000, 5,000, and then sky's the limit. Really,
Okay.
sky
Okay.
is
Okay.
the limit.
Yes.
Depends on your network. So I think it's wonderful that you're trying to get them this, this support that, oh, I can make a living
Yes,
out of it.
something
I
at least
I
something.
understand that, but I think five. I said it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, thanks.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's a good start. I just wanted some starting
yeah.
amount,
For
like for that.
YouTube, like,
I have.
yeah. I think for YouTube cover makers, yeah, I think the minimum is 5,000 rupees people charge or something
Oh,
like
okay,
that.
okay. Oh, oh, okay,
5,000 to
okay.
10,000. ऐसे कुछ होगा,
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. Mhm.
Yeah. I really don't know what's the going rate for YouTube. I honestly don't know.
Yeah, just like approximate
Yeah,
amount. Yes, yes.
yeah.
Thanks, Siddharth. Thanks, Siddharth.
You're
That was a
welcome. You're
perfect,
welcome.
perfect answer, I guess.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you.
you.
Yeah.
May I invite one last question? We'll wrap up after that, and you can
Yes.
always email us for more questions if you have any.
Yes.
Yeah, hi Ritesh.
Lija. Hi, Lija.
Hello Siddharth, thank you for that
Hey.
wonderful session. It just took me back to the memories 10, 12 years back when we did the basics of
Fantastic.
music production then.
That's
I could
fantastic.
totally relate with you because see, after doing music production for 1 year, I basically jumped into music teaching.
That's
So
fantastic.
my hands-on experience went to literally null, other than those that with the equipment that I had at home.
Fair enough.
But coming to an online platform now, past 1.5 years,
Yeah.
all that experience, all that knowledge is being put to use, and kids are even for technically now that Zoom also supports stereo image and everything.
Exactly.
Slowly we are working and experimenting with OBS and all these different technologies and stuff.
Yeah.
Now, when we are talking about music production teaching in terms of the course that you just enlightened, now hopefully things will get better. But on this setup, like in an online setup, how practical is it to teach? Because without an hands-on experience, it's literally null. I cannot teach, okay, multi-miking, I can teach, I can tell them, unless they have an hands-on, it's useless. And secondly, the person who's teaching, that's what I'm coming to say.
Yeah.
No offense, nothing. It's we know the reality. Say we want grade 1 guitar, grade 2 piano, whatever we want to teach. You buy a book, sheet music, teach.
Right.
But that's not with music production. You cannot take that risk, because you cannot take that risk. It's not just about the knowledge, it's about the using the equipment in the right way.
Right.
So the chances of people using it, yes, it's all music, we're all musicians, brothers and everything, but then the students should not be at a disadvantage. It requires, so I think Ritesh mentioned about the VQ.
Yeah.
Okay, with the vocational qualification. So is there a credibility, where a point source for credibility for teachers, where you accredit teachers, these are the teachers who are supposed to be? Because it's not like music, like a keyboard, guitar, drums, or music theory. This is a serious subject. This is not just like, okay, let me teach music, and most of my students, 5, 6 of them.
So what I understand from, sorry to interrupt, but what I understand, you have, I think, 3 questions, and correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. The first question you have is that we'll talk about how to perfectly manage teaching through the online platform, because at the end of it, you feel, and I agree with you, that a lot of the equipment and things covered are very experiential in nature. Unless you touch it, feel it, and see what they do physically, how can a student get the full experience of going through that process? That's one of the questions. The second question you've asked is that nowadays you see a lot of these, in quotes, kids who will do, let's say, a few grades and then get into teaching. So how do you segregate? Let's say you're asking whether Rock School has qualifications for certified teachers, like certification programs, that these are the recommended teachers, right?
Yes.
Now, before I get into the first one, because in that, as a music producer, and since you are one too, I'll be able to tell you what I do, at least for online. Okay, and maybe you could take some ideas from that. But I think for the second question, I think Ritesh would be a better person to give this answer about certified teaching, programs with Rock School. So Ritesh, please take over for that one, I think.
Okay, should I answer that first?
Yes, please. Yeah.
So there are teaching diplomas available with us, right? So that is purely about teaching skills, irrespective of what instrument or subject that you're teaching. So that is something that you can look into. So that is one option. But as far as the qualifying the teachers, certifying who is qualified to be teaching Rock School syllabus, we can't do that for any subject. We can't say that this person has not done grade 8 in piano, so he can't teach a grade 8 piano student. They can. It's all a matter of experience and knowledge that you have. So that is the same space we are with every other instrument, so music production included, that we can't certify who is qualified to teach the syllabus or not. We are setting benchmarks, they're learning outcomes set for each grade. Anybody who feels that he's confident to get those students to give that achieve that outcome, they're qualified to teach. That's practically how it is.
So, is there any teaching diploma for music production also?
This is something I'll need to explore. As for now, the teaching diplomas revolve around the instrumental teaching, not for music production teaching. But I can discover about this and get back to you on that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so now to answer your first question, how do you make the experience of teaching online, which is very experiential, more streamlined and actually productive for your student? Now, the thing is, of course, you're absolutely right that there's certain things that a student has to be physically present to, apply certain methods, be it an analog compressor or, just the fact that a student is in, a group of students are in physical proximity and looking and at your DAW and what you're doing as a teacher. Of course, there is no way to match that completely. But I'll tell you what I do is, for example, you're talking about the fact, like miking techniques. I was talking about stereo miking techniques, right? Like I have stereo mic, so I can probably demonstrate that. Maybe you don't, and it's completely fine. But what I do with my students is that, for example, I'm conducting certain online lessons right now, and for things like, for example, what is the difference between an analog mixer, you know mix versus in the box mixing, or like what we were talking about in grade for compressed versus uncompressed. I think the best way to do is give them extra reading material, send them links to different videos, that will make them feel part of that virtual experience. For example, when we talk about microphone techniques, there are so many YouTube videos, out there that compare different miking techniques on the same source, you know. So I think the best we can do as teachers is to basically get rid of that alienation of that equipment till we can actually be physically present in a studio, so that even if your students seen certain videos or read certain materials, they feel, oh yeah, we talked about it in class, so at least when they go back into the studio, they feel more confident about it. It's kind of like how a lot of pianists who are trying to learn the piano don't actually have acoustical pianos at home, do they? Right? But they still master it really well, right? And sure, when it's time to, let's say, give a concert or a recital, they might just go half an hour early just to get used to that piano, right? The action and everything. But since they have that experience, even on a digital keyboard, they'll still give an amazing performance, right? So it's similar, that if you have the knowledge, if I know what XY is, like right now, and I'm not boasting about my experience, I can look at an instrument and say, this is in my head, this is how an XY will sound, this will how a mid side will sound. I can tell you that. And that comes with experience. I'm pretty sure you're also like that with certain things. You know what you want to get, and your students might not have that privilege right now because of the pandemic and everything. But I think the best way is to give them extra material, give them links to a lot of videos and a lot of audio samples. So, and send them links, and you'll have to to make that extra effort to make them feel involved. But I think that's just the best way to do it. And as even as a teacher, it doesn't mean that you have to buy all the gear in the world, because everybody, I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to buy like, oh, stereo pair, matched pair Neumanns or Rhodes like the ones I have, and 10 different microphones and the best gear out there to make your point. Because at the end of it, the concepts are exactly the same, and
Basically, they just to get the concept. Yes.
exactly, because if you think about it, I have these microphones, okay? They will sound completely, their frequency response is just a guideline for me, but they will sound completely different based on how I'm playing an instrument, who's performing it. Good music, as you know, are aware, starts with the musician, I feel.
Yeah.
You know, now part two of it is to record or capture that performance with the best clean recording and intention. If those two things are sorted, there's no way there's going to be any complications. That's what I feel. But at the end of it, I always say this because I'm a guitar player, and I'm pretty sure some of you are guitar players. Mr. Steve Vai, who's considered one of the best guitarists out there, he will still sound better than me if I give him the cheapest guitar in the world and I have the most expensive guitar, you know? And I think it works like that. It's at the end of it, your talent comes across
The skill
because
set. Yes.
yeah, because what what you're dealing with. If you don't have the world's most expensive compressor or a Neumann U87 at home, doesn't matter. I know records that have been produced on a SM57 who sound just as good, things like that. So, to answer Sir's question, what mic I should get the one that you are happy with and get the one that you can afford. Of course, there's certain that are really bad, so stay away from those. But at the end of it, really doesn't matter. Gear has come to a point where everybody has an option to buy something they're comfortable with, and I think that's the most important thing. Be comfortable with how much you want to spend. Just because I have a road that whatever costs 30 grand for a 30, whatever it is, 30, 40 grand for a pair, doesn't mean you need a road. You can get a matched pair by Behringer for 5,000 rupees, right? If you know
Yeah,
how to use,
I'm using the Behringer's pencil CO2s.
which is great. That's my point.
Yeah, so we cannot afford a mixer, so I'm using a virtual mixer for that matter right now.
That's
So
my point, which is I think the right technique. I mean, I could have bought Neumann KM184s, which are like a lakh for a pair. But like I said to the person who asked me that question, what Mike, I don't have acoustical treatment except for these curtains right now, at least in Delhi. So, and trust me, a lot of times, if you're experienced enough, you can process cheaper mics sound more expensive. Now there are
thank
even
you.
softwares to make certain things sound like a different mic out there, just to let you know.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Siddharth.
You're welcome. You're
So
welcome.
that one thing I would like to add to that is, online learning is better than no learning at this stage.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah,
What are the
absolutely.
choices?
Exactly. No, exactly.
And in some situations, you'll find that online learning is actually better than the offline learning. Like I'm teaching theory these days. I'm teaching to like 50, 80 students or just 4 batches. And I'm able to do that more effectively online because they actually have a better view of my piano through the upright camera than they would actually have in a physical class.
True.
So it works better that way for me.
Yes, and even with music production, like when I'm teaching, I always share my screen with the DAW, and we have multiple screens, so the students are following me on what I'm trying to teach them, in terms of a certain skill set or a certain technique, and then whatever I've taught them, I'm sending them a worksheet of this is what we learned and an exercise. So I am making that extra effort of writing down what we learned, including the shortcuts available, so it becomes muscle memory for them. So like Ritesh said, so it's some learning is better than no learning. Of course, there are restrictions, but till those restrictions are lifted, we just have to deal with it and make the best of the situation.
So,
Yeah.
sir, are you using any separate software for audio instead of Zoom, like audio movers and all?
No, I'm a simple guy. I just use Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah, it
So,
works for me.
Siddharth, one thing is
Yeah.
there, since you just mentioned that you're doing a screen sharing, aren't you finding there is a latency, like your student is able to hear a kind of a bit delayed?
So there is a latency in terms of when for example, if I'm playing back, the screen that they're seeing and the audio they're hearing, there is a bit of a lag, of course,
But
That
what
is-
about the quality? Like, is it like muffled when they hear it? Because
so
I
the-
experience that whenever I play a certain project in my DAW and they sign like, no, this is not how it used to sound in YouTube when you
yeah,
put
so
it, and
so
it's
the
sounding
best
really
trick,
muffled.
you know what I do? As soon as I've done something in my system, I also send them a quick MP3 to listen separately.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that, because there is a difference, of course, the stereo weight and the low end, it's not the same, So you just attach the bounce quickly and attach the file.
Okay.
Say, oh, this is how it's sounding.
Yeah,
That's what
because
I would
actually I face the same problem. In grade 3, there was a ear training where there are two similar files, A and B.
Yeah.
One is a mono and another one is stereo. And I played them, they both sounded the same for them.
No, but
So-
yeah, so I think, that maybe increase your bandwidth on your internet, that might help.
Yeah.
But the other thing is also that when you're giving these, if you have an external sound card, use that as a monitoring source, not your internal laptop mic.
You mean as a teacher or as a student?
Either way.
Both ways. Okay.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I got it.
Because your latency would be less through an audio interface. That's why.
Audio interface.
Unless you're
Okay.
just doing speech.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, before we wrap up, I would like to add one point, which is, I think, very important for all the teachers to kind of keep track of, is that learning is a 3-step process. First step of that is planning, second is delivery, and third is the assessment. So our syllabus is laid out for you, which really assists you in your planning part. You do the delivery as a teacher, and your evidence of learning that the student has actually learned it or not is the assessment, which is what we are giving you too. So please don't skip the assessment part with your students, right? And if more of your students are able to give you assessments and are able to sign up for these exams, more support will be able to give you in ways of this webinar, and we might be able to give you even more support in terms of, like Shubham was saying, that we can get you deals from roads and stuff like that, road and all these companies. We can give you deals if we know that we are dealing with a vast number of students, and then we can negotiate with these companies better and get you more benefits from it, right? So please try and take your own exams so you are a qualified tutor, and get your students to sign up for these exams so they complete the cycle of learning as we know it, and then it's more benefit to everybody. Yeah. Thank you so much, Siddharth. It seems you're not well today. You're down with the cold or something, it seems. Yeah.
No. I don't have a cold or anything. It's just that when I'm in Delhi, I'm very susceptible to temperature changes sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, because this is summertime, so I'm allergic to pollen. So sometimes
Hay fever.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's that. Otherwise, I'm doing absolutely fine. I hope I wasn't too slow for you guys.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah,
It's
great.
just great, man.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
You're
this,
welcome.
and please keep in touch. Any information needed, you can write to india@rslawards.com. It comes to all our team, all our BDMs and everybody, and we can obviously connect you with Siddharth. His email ID is shared here, so you may feel free to write to him for any support you may need on behalf of RSL.
Absolutely. Yes.
And we will be doing another 2 rounds of the workshops. One is going to be the level 1, which we'll possibly do in the beginning of July. And we will do a level 3 presentation, which will be grade 6 to 8 content coverage. So that will be planning a little later. So we will keep you all informed how and when we are doing this. Thank you so much for attending the webinar. It's really encouraging to see a big number here today.
Yes,
Thank you
absolutely.
so much.
Thank you guys for being so patient, and thanks Ritesh for having me.
Thank you,
It's
Siddharth.
always fun to do these workshops. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much,
Bye,
Siddharth and
everyone.
Ritesh.
All right, see
Bye.
you guys. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.